Good evening, everybody. We now call this meeting to order. If you could please rise if you are able and pay attention to Policeman Mike Lesser for the invocation to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is my privilege now to ask Mr. Barry Feeker to come forward to give us the invocation. I'm blessed to be able to call this man my friend. So,
likewise, thank you. Mayor, hello there on the screen, and council members there and here, city staff, Mr. Manager. Just want to say on behalf of myself as well as many citizens, thank you for what you do. Not an easy job, certainly something that you don't get thanked enough for. So thank you for helping this city to be everything that it can be and what it's going to be. Join with me in prayer if you would. Father, we thank you for this day you've given to us. Nothing's guaranteed, we know that. I thank you for these men and women who are leaders of our community, ones that have been chosen, elected, put into position to serve their districts, to serve the city as a whole. Thank you for their service each and every day, but especially in this last year plus. This has not been an easy time for the world, our nation, or our community. You've called together a group of people who have a heart for others, heart for you, heart for doing right. And so we thank you for them. Ask that you would bless them and their families. Ask that you would bless their decisions. Ask that you would bless and guide the decisions that are here tonight. Thank you for the opportunity we have to live in Topeka, Kansas. Thank you that we have the opportunity to not only be who we can be for each other, but be who we need to be for this country right now. So I ask for your blessing and guidance upon everyone here tonight for the sake of our city, for the sake of our nation, for the sake of every man, woman, and children. In Jesus' name.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all. Deputy Mayor, if you could please do us the honor of the proclamation.
I will do that, Madam Mayor, as soon as we'll call the roll.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes, here.
Council Members Hiller. Here. Valdivia Acala. Here. Ortiz.
Here.
Emerson.
here.
Padilla.
Here.
Nager.
Here.
Dobler.
Here.
Duncan.
Here.
And Lesser.
Here.
We have 10 present.
And being present, we now move on to the proclamations. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. If I could have Tim McHenry and Kathy, I don't want to mispronounce this, Slaughterback? Slaughterback. If you would join me up here, please, with your canines. Okay, thank you. Whereas there are thousands of pet partner therapy animal teams serving in communities across the United States, and whereas therapy animal teams in the city of Topeka play an essential role in improving human health and well-being through the human-animal bond, and whereas pet partner therapy animals teams like millions of visits per year in settings such as hospitals, retirement and long-term care communities, schools, hospice, and whereas pet partner therapy animal teams interact with a variety of people in our community, including veterans, seniors, patients, children facing illiteracy challenges, the incarcerated, and those approaching end of life. And whereas Pet Partners has designated April 30, 2021 as National Therapy Animal Day. And whereas these exceptional therapy animals who partner with their human companions bring comfort and healing to those in need. And now, therefore, Mayor, Michelle De La Isla, Mayor of the City of Topeka, do hereby proclaim April 30, 2021 as Therapy Animal Day, National Therapy Animal Day in the City of Topeka, Kansas. I encourage all Topeka citizens to celebrate our therapy animals and their human handlers. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. We represent a local organization called Prairie Land Visiting Animals that provides support and comfort to people throughout our community in need of support and in need of de-stressing. And certainly in this last year, those numbers are just growing all the time. We work at hospitals, we work at the Juvenile Detention Center, we work at residential facilities, and it's our great privilege to be a part of this community and offer this service.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you again. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you for bringing the puppy to the meeting. As many of you know, when I'm working from home, my puppy is my companion as well, and he likes to see what we're doing. Waiting for Deputy Mayor to get back to his seat before we proceed.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
can I make a quick request?
absolutely.
It appears that, or it sounds like somebody has left their mic on, and so over the proclamation, we got a lot of throat clearing and paper flipping. So just a reminder to turn off your mics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman. Okay, we have Deputy Mayor back in his position. At this point in time, we move on to the consent agenda, if the clerk would read.
A are minutes of the regular meeting of May 4, 2021, and there are no applications.
What is the pleasure of the governing body?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by the Deputy Mayor, a second by Councilwoman Nager. At this point in time, are there any questions or any discussion with regard to the consent agenda? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Councilmember Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Acala,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
and Padilla.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
All right, at this point, we delve into the action items. Action item A, if the clerk would read.
A is a public hearing and an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout relating to the vacation of a 20-foot wide easement described as public easement for utilities, vehicular, and pedestrian ingress, egress, or property located at 700 Southwest Topeka Boulevard in the city of Topeka, Shawnee County, Kansas.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I had asked that Director Finder go through the particulars on this request. Bill?
Okay. Thanks, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, governing body. This particular vacation is at the old Bank of America property at 7th and Topeka Boulevard. And a few years ago, when that was first developed, there was a vacation of an alley that ran through the property, and a easement was retained for access for vehicular and pedestrian access, as well as utilities. So what the new owner is coming back to ask is that that easement for vehicular and pedestrian access be removed while retaining the necessary utility easements, because there are a few utilities in that easement. By removal of the access easement, there won't be any impacted surrounding property owners, as they do have access to property, to their property, and this will just allow for a little less constraint on future development of the property. There is nothing proposed, nothing that has been put forth to us, so I don't know what exactly. It's just for future use and not to be constrained by that access easement. So I'll stand for any questions at this time.
Questions for Mr. Fyan? If there's no questions for Mr. Fyander, this is a public hearing. So at this point in time, I will call the public hearing so that any individual that is interested in speaking with regards to this item can feel free to do so. And if you all understand and remember the protocol, I will call it 3 times because this is how we're supposed to manage it. So I don't see at this point anybody standing up to make remarks. So you are welcome, again, to make any remarks with regards to this item in the agenda.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I have notice here that Mr. Mark Boyd via Zoom had signed up for the public hearing on this ordinance? Or is that, yeah, that's 4A, is it not?
Yeah.
It is. So if Mr. Boyd would like to speak, this is the time for you to speak, Mr. Boyd. I see that you're here. Mr. Boyd, if you could please unmute yourself if you would like to make remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No, I'm just here representing the owner in this as a consultant, so no comments.
All right. And then finally, for the 3rd time, anybody else who would like to make any remarks during this public hearing, you are welcome to do so. Okay, at this point in time, we call the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of the governing body?
Second.
We have a motion for approval and we have a second. Do we have additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Councilmember Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Daley Isla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
and Nager.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
We now move on to item B of the action items, if the clerk would read.
B is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout, amending the district map referred to and made a part of the zoning ordinances by Section 1850-050 of the Topeka Municipal Code on property located at 3907 and 3908 Southwest Burlingame Road from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to special use permits for community building and alcohol sales and private membership club and golf course, and a conditional use permit for outdoor recreational uses, retail sales, and food service, all to PUD Plan Unit Development Master Plan, O&I 2 uses on Tract A, I-1 uses only as indicated for Tracts B, C, and D.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we are going to discuss this item based on the Planning Commission's recommendation to rezone this property. Staff agrees with the recommendation to adopt the ordinance. I'll let Director Finder go through the details related to this request. Bill?
Okay, thank you again, Mr. City Manager. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see the slides there.
Yes.
You should see a zoning map. I'm going to try and sum this up as best I can. There was a pretty lengthy process. The original request was received 2 years ago in 2019 and spawned 3 public hearings with the Planning Commission, one in 2019, one in 2020, and one earlier this year. Actually, there were 2 meetings earlier this year. So what was the request? As you heard, it was to expand the zoning at what is known as the sports zone complex to allow O&I, office and institutional uses, as well as I-1 light industrial uses for flexibility in marketing the land for future development. There is no definitive new development proposed, so this just opens up the land for more flexibility down the road. As you can see on this, if you can see the slide here, indicates there's 4 tracks. There's a tract A, there's a tract B, tract C, and a tract D. The original request just involved the first 3 tracks, A, B, and C. There was a tract D added later at the last stage here to accommodate some issues. And so I'm going to just go over the lay of the land here. I think it'll be helpful, particularly with questions as we get into any issues here tonight. So first off, as you see, the tract A, B, and C, and D all involve the proposed rezoning. There are 3 residences outside of those tracts along Burlingame, as well as a cemetery. There's 2 entrances to the complex. There's a north entrance that I'll talk about tonight, which is kind of the main entrance into the sports zone. There's also a south entrance that is going to be more utilized in the future for any change of uses. Okay, so starting with tract, I'll go over each tract and tell you what the PUD proposes, and then I'll go over some of the issues that were brought up by the neighbors and show you how those were addressed for each of these tracts. So tract A, that is the northeast tract. That includes the current DMV offices. There is a truck school, training school for commercial driver's licenses. There's a dance studio and daycare. That particular tract in the PUD, all those uses there would be legitimized by the PUD for ONI2 uses, with one big caveat, and that's a condition to prohibit any heavy or large truck traffic and truck parking on tract A. So all large trucks would be redirected to the southern entrance, the south entrance here, to take access, as well as to tract D for parking and training. So no trucks access or parking on tract A. Okay, tract B has the current sports zone facility. That would be allowed by the PUD, but in addition to that, there would be some limited light industrial use allowed in the future. All of those uses would have to be internal to the building, so no outside storage or outside sales. And also, if there is a change of use on tract B for light industrial uses, that it would trigger construction of a physical barrier between tract A and tract B to further restrict any large truck traffic onto tract A or vice versa. So all truck traffic, large truck traffic would be signed so that they would be directed to the south entrance only and not the north entrance. So that's tract B. So it opens it up a little bit to some light industrial. Tract C, the furthest south tract is actually kind of vacant right now. There is a little bit of outside storage there. This would be rezoned under the PUD for I1, the uses. So light industrial would be allowed here. There are no real restrictions on this tract. If you jump back to, you can kind of see that tract C is surrounded by I1. That gray color there is surrounded by the I1 zoning already. Okay, and then the last tract furthest to the west, tract D, that was the tract that was just added here at the last stage of the process to accommodate an issue we're trying to address. That tract, the PUD allows the athletic fields that are out there right now, as well as any temporary truck parking and staging area for the CDL training school. There is a parking lot on that tract D that they would be restricted to. So no industrial uses allowed on tract D, just open space zoning, as well as that temporary truck parking. Okay, so with that in mind, let me go over the kind of what I would see as the 5 main issues that were brought up by the neighbors during the process and how those were addressed in the PUD. First of all, I mentioned a lot about the trucks. So truck parking, truck traffic, as I'd already indicated, it would be, is a concern. It would adversely affect the residences along adjacent to Tract A. So again, those have been restricted and redirected to the south entrance, as well as to Tract D. They are not allowed on Tract A. And further, the developer is required to sign the entrances appropriately. So for prohibiting truck traffic at the north entrance, as well as indicating the truck entry at the south entrance within the next, well, actually it's by the end of the month, by the end of May as part of the PUD. Okay, the second issue was, we'll stay up there and talk about traffic related to the traffic controls at the intersection of the north entrance there with a frontage road that currently fronts and gives access to the 3 houses as well as the cemetery. The developer, well, let me say there was a traffic study that the city performed and traffic engineer approved, recommended that there be enhanced traffic controls signs at this intersection for safety as well as to direct the truck traffic appropriately. So that is as part of the PUD. The developer has to put those signs in, again, by the end of the month. Third issue was outside storage. Midway through the process, it was we were made aware by the neighbors there are some outside storage of materials on Tract A that is not allowed under the current zoning, and so those were removed by the applicant at some point midway through the process. As I indicated before, there is no outside storage allowed as part of the PUD moving forward at all. The signage, there's a EMC or electronic message center sign at the north entrance to the sports zone. That was a pre-existing sign prior to our EMC standards being adopted. So that basically got grandfathered in at the time. However, it still needs to comply with our brightness and our flashing standards. There is no flashing allowed here. And the PUD the PUD would further restrict it by having the owner turn off the sign at 5 o'clock in the winter months and then at 8 o'clock in the other months of the year. And then lastly, the last issue we addressed was with screening and buffering. And what I mean by that, along the cemetery edge and the residence edge, their back edge, but along Tract A and Tract B, there is a PUD requirement to install a 30-foot buffer. And it could be a combination of landscape or fencing that would effectively screen the parking areas from the residences and the cemetery. And that has to be installed within 180 days, or I think by the end of October this year. It was brought to light that there was a similar requirement when the sports zone got their special permit in the late 90s. And so that basically reinstates that, if you will, and requires it to be put in again within the next 180 days. And as well as language that requires that buffer and screening to be maintained. Okay, so those are the main issues. There's one other issue of note to clarify. There were protests filed in this case. There was 4 properties, the cemetery and 3 homes that filed a protest that constituted about 7% of the protest area. There is a requirement that if that protest amounts to at least 20% of the protest area, that it will trigger a 3/4 vote of the governing body for approval. So it did not
did not reach that bar. We also went back and just to check to see if the original request would have triggered a 3/4 vote and found that it did not. What I mean by that is, as I indicated earlier, the track D was added later, and so it really expanded that protest area, made it bigger. So if we didn't add that area and just did the protest area for tract A, B, and C, we still would have fallen below the 20% requirement to trigger that 3/4 vote. So just wanted you to know that. And with that, Planning Commission did recommend approval of these conditions. There were 2 abstentions and 6 votes for. So I will stop now and see if there are any questions I can help with.
So do we have additional questions for Mr. Fyander? And the only thing that I would like to do before we get into questions and comments, we do have somebody signed up to speak on this item, and that is Kevin Holland, and he is supposed to be here via Zoom. Mr. Holland, are you available for remarks?
Yes, Madam Mayor, and I'll waive our discussion if need to be.
Wonderful. So at this point in time, governing body, questions for Mr. Fyander. Councilwoman Hiller, to be followed by Councilwoman Ortiz.
You didn't even raise my hand, but I did have some questions, so thank you.
Oh, sorry. I could have sworn I saw this when you were there, but go ahead.
Good mind reading, exactly. We got a lot of literature on this with the packet. We've received letters otherwise. And I've done my best to try and figure this out. It seems that one of the key concerns of the people who are not favoring these changes is that the owners of the property, the applicant, had made commitments or had responsibilities to do some of these things a long time ago, and they never were forced to do it. And they don't have a lot of confidence that it will happen now. When you went through the items, the barrier for through traffic and the signage, there are 2 items that are supposed to be done by the end of the month. And then there is the buffer that apparently has been overdue for 15 years or so, that they got 6 months to do. Could you talk a little bit about how you would make sure those happen and what happens if that doesn't happen? Or conversely, whether we could wait until they're done?
Sure. Well, those conditions would act as any zoning regulations do now. We would enforce those and carry through on the process. If ultimately the backstop to all of this is if you don't do these, not only would that end up going to court and you would be potentially fined and still made to do what you're supposed to do, but you wouldn't be able to ever change the use to what you want to market it for. So the very essence of the request was to have that flexibility to change it to for industrial, light industrial uses. That would also be prohibited, I guess, at that point. So so there's an enforcement as well as they could move forward on any new development as well.
If I could understand we would have to take them to court. We wouldn't just revert the zoning, or really, what happens?
So if this is approved, then you have a new zoning, and so if an owner doesn't abide by that zoning, then yes, it ultimately, and they don't remedy the violation, then that does end up going through the court process eventually. And like I said, if there was ever a point where they wanted to change the use or do something different out there, that would also not be allowed or permitted until the violations were corrected.
Well, if I understand what you just shared and what's in the paperwork, we did not require them to meet their prior standards before going through this process.
And if there was any pre-existing violations, they were either one being remedied by the PUD, so we don't we hold off on enforcement until the PUD matter is resolved. Several of these were just brought up because of the PUD process. We had never received a complaint until the PUD process was started. And so when we looked into those things, those were either brought to the owner's attention so they could fix them, or incorporate them into the PUD so those could be fixed through the PUD.
If I may, Mayor, my understanding is there's not a rush on this. This is to position the property for future changes in uses, it sounds like. Is there, do we have the leverage, or is it possible to ask to have those things done before we vote?
I would have to defer to a legal opinion on that.
City Attorney?
Councilmember, I think that you'd have to postpone it. They've already had the public hearing on it. They presented it as it is right now. If you want to remand it back to the Planning Commission, I guess you could do that. That would require 7 votes to do so.
Well, it just sounded like my understanding is that that's the big rub,
Actually,
and I'm just
6.
trying to figure out what our procedures should have been or could be. If I could ask 2 other questions. One is about the sign. That sign was put in before we passed our regulations about lighted signs.
Correct.
Was it then, I'm trying to remember because it hasn't been that long ago that we passed our rules and debated them pretty heavily about brightness and flashing and all that. Was it a violation of our sign ordinance when it went in?
No, it was not. We did not have, first of all, we didn't have any EMC regulations back when it was permitted, which I believe was around 2012, from what we can see. So when our EMC regulations did come along, that sign, while it didn't have to comply with the size restrictions, it does have to comply with the flashing and the brightness restrictions.
Oh, I missed that in your presentation. So it does comply now with our flashing and brightness?
Well, it's turned off right now. And so we would have to go out there and verify that when it is turned on, that it does comply. I don't think it was tested to whether it did comply with brightness. I know flashing wise, that's an easy one to know if it's flashing or not. Brightness has to be tested before it is allowed to be used again.
Okay. And the last question, we got a communication either yesterday or today from one of the residents, and it said that Tract D wasn't owned by the applicant. Is that true?
We are not aware of that. It looks to be owned by the same owner of the Tract A, B, and C.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz, to be followed by Councilman Duncan.
I think Karen answered all my questions. But are we changing this so they can have further, and I apologize, I left my glasses at home. So they can further, like this says community building and alcohol sales, private membership club and golf, so are they looking to put that in?
Councilwoman Ortiz, no, that's the existing permit that allows, this was initially a community hall, I think, for the Knights of Columbus. And that's kind of how it got started. And then it converted over to some office uses and then eventually the recreational sports zone. But no, we would remove all of that language and just allow office and institutional uses, which does not permit alcohol sales and consumption.
Well, I was just asking, I know the owners, but I was just asking because I was like, I thought this was a kid zone, so I thought, well, maybe we're doing something different here. So, and it is kind of congested on the entrances and exits, oh goodness. How are they going to control that? The north exit and entrance and the south? You were saying that, so is that, that's more for the bigger trucks? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, no, we don't want that for the bigger trucks. There would need to be signage put up by the developer to indicate that no trucks, this is not a truck entrance, no trucks allowed, and that they would redirect those trucks down to the southern entrance. So we are, if you look at it this way, the PUD would restrict the intensity of the traffic coming into that driveway more than it does now. There would be less large vehicles by way of these conditions.
By the signage?
By the zoning and then implementing that through signage, and then enforcing or redirecting them to a new entrance further south and a new training area farther west.
Okay, so the protest petitions, did I hear you correctly? They didn't get it in a timely manner?
They did get it in a timely manner, but the calculation only totaled about 7% of the protest area, and the minimum to trigger a 3/4 vote is 20%. So they did not reach that standard.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Or thank you, Mayor, I'm sorry.
No worries. Councilman Duncan to be followed by Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Well, I guess my first question, is there anyone here this evening representing Sports Zone or the owners of this property? I mean, is there anyone who,
Yes.
we seem to have some very specific questions for those folks that could probably be answered by them if they were, do we know? Is he here?
Mayor?
Can he speak?
Councilman Duncan, could the city attorney respond to that?
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan, the public hearing occurred at the Planning Commission level, so really the only job here is whether or not to approve the rezoning based on the facts that are before you right now, which includes the Planning Commission minutes from, I think there were 3 meetings, the public meetings with various stakeholders, et cetera, the staff report. So we don't allow public comment from anyone at this level. All that occurs at the Planning Commission. So you won't find any of the neighbors who are here signed up for Zoom to comment on it. I think Mr. Holland signed up, but was allowed to be placed on the list when it was inadvertent and he shouldn't have been. And he was contacted beforehand to say that he would not have the opportunity to speak because all the information is addressed in the documents.
Okay, and I understand that, but the information's only in the documents if the questions were asked. So when we have a question of no one's here to tell me except we think that they do own Track D, or we're not in a position to ask the, I mean, if we're going to make statements today, right or wrong, and this has been an issue of they didn't follow zoning previously, are they going to do it forward? It feels like that's a very direct question that needs to be asked of those individuals.
Councilmember, I'll ask Bill if he can confirm this, but I do believe that Track D is owned by the applicant.
Okay.
Yes, and if I was not 100% in my answer, I am 100% in my answer now. As far as what was submitted, the same owner is owner of all those tracks that we have records for. So unless something happened in the last day or two, as filed, yes. And by the way, when they do, they're going to have to sign off on the PUD. So the owners, there has to be another check before they even sign the PUD. So we're 100% certain they are owners of that land with this info.
All right. In relation to the traffic study, what is part of this is two things, and I understand COVID has created some issues with us being able to manage traffic in and out. I mean, it seems to me through a lot of the complaints we got, while there's various things, we've talked about the zoning and the traffic, the traffic one seems to be the biggest contention in regards to safety. I guess the only red flags that I have some question about is if you actually read the traffic study, it essentially says, since we used the numbers from the housing and the cemetery, and then you made some guesswork, educated guesswork, albeit, but to determine what the actual numbers coming in and out of Sports Zone would be on an average Saturday. I feel like those are very different. The Sports Zone is a very clear destination that has very different traffic flow than a single dwelling family units and a cemetery. But I understand with COVID that was part of the issue. But then when you read the reports from staff, it says, you were correct in pointing out that there are issues such as approach speed and angle that are not resolved by the proposed signing. These are geometric issues that I cannot find a palatable way to solve in the near term. And it's essentially a polite way of saying we recognize there may be some issue, but we're not sure how to fix it. And I guess I'm just curious if that's where we're just leaving it, or if we're still looking at ways to try to address those concerns, whether that's another look at traffic, or if we've come up with some signage, or if that's just the reality of how it is in that spot.
Well, Councilman Duncan, I would say that the ultimate solution would be probably a pretty expensive solution to allow those homes a second means of access to the north on that frontage road. And that is something that, again, this PUD doesn't exacerbate or intensify, but it probably goes back to when that was originally constructed, that configuration of adding the frontage road. There was no second means of access to the north, I guess is the best way of saying that. So I think if there's any, reading between the lines, I think that would be what would ultimately solve a lot of the safety issues, because that would allow those residents to exit and enter without having to conflict with Sports Zone traffic.
Last question, and maybe this is, I don't know, crazy, and that's okay. Do we have a mechanism of making certain zoning contingent on following certain steps? As long as you meet this, then yes, you can be granted the zoning to address some of those concerns, pre-concerns about not doing past items, perhaps?
Good question. I'll try. I think this is what you're asking. Correct me if I'm wrong. We do have, from time to time, have put some time limits on performance. Obviously, we have some of that here, do this in 30 days, do this in 180 days. But in terms of it affecting the PUD or the zoning, meaning, is there a year or two that that this could come back to see, hey, are they actually performing, under these conditions the way we approve them? And we've done that with some conditional use permits where we give them a time frame, say it's approved for 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is. And along the way, they have to come back and renew that. And that has some force to it. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but that's one tool that we use for conditions on a few.
Okay, no, that helps.
Okay.
Thank you. That was all. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor,
Councilwoman Valdivia, City Manager.
just a quick note. I just looked at the county appraiser site, and it is still current. The land is still currently owned by T&J Land Company that is tract deed.
Thank you. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. What you just said about the renewal, and if there are violations and they're not being addressed, that is one tool that might be able to be used. So you're saying that is a mechanism that may be able to make sure that they get caught up on all of this? Or, I mean, can you explain that a little bit in more detail?
Sure, and I definitely would defer to legal on this matter, because the PUD is a little different than a CUP, which is what we've used those time limits on. But in my mind, what you're really getting at is before the owner can do something new, like they want to do, that they have to show that they have satisfied all the conditions and do not have any zoning violations on the property. And that I think is baked into the PUD already, because we as a staff, this is of course assuming they come in and say, hey, we want to put in a light industrial use. That's what this is allowing us to do. And we go in and say, well, okay, have you make sure you've satisfied all the PUD requirements up to this point before we can proceed on approving your new use. So in that sense, the PUD has kind of a baked-in mechanism to not allow someone more use of the land before they have checked off those other things that they should have done. But there is potentially the ability to, I guess, put a sunset, if you will, on this. But I would have to defer to legal. We may have to research whether that is something we can do with a PUD or not.
So really what you're saying is what you just told Councilman Duncan is really meant for a CUP, not a PUD, which is what we're talking about right now and getting ready to vote on.
We would have to look into it if we can do it on the PUD. Yes, I would say so. Yes.
Right, if you could do it. Okay,
Yeah.
and to me, there's something about this that feels incomplete. I would be very similar in my concerns to what Councilwoman Hiller has, because, and it seems to me once we vote on it, if you vote to approve it, there's no going back. And so out of the presentation that you gave, how many adjustments or improvements that the neighbors are requesting in total are they requesting to have done? And we know that one was 15 years and nothing's ever been done.
Actually, it was longer than that. I would say, to answer your question, I went through those 5 issues trying to be addressed. So all of the I guess the buffering, the landscape screening, and that sort of thing, that is going to be required in the next 180 days. So that there's 3 or 4 conditions that pertain to that buffering and that screening. The traffic controls have to be put in the next 30 days. So there's a number of signs that would have to go up. I'd say at least 6 signs. There is nothing to do with the EMC sign other than to test for its brightness before it gets turned back on. So there's another condition there. And I think, and then it's just enforcement from there, because the signs don't in of themselves physically restrict trucks from coming onto the track that they're not supposed to come on to. So there would have to be monitoring and working with the owner to make sure that that is being done and being adhered to. And that is a process.
Okay, and was the Planning Commission aware of all of these items that still need to be done?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, they were.
Okay, and is this normally how PUDs of this nature are followed through with? In other words, the city votes, or the governing body votes, Planning Commission governing body votes, but there's still A, B, C, D, E, F, G that needs to be done. I mean, is there ever a process where something like this comes forward where both sides have wholeness as much as possible?
Oh, yeah, most, I would say most PUDs that you would see have conditions that have to be satisfied for that development to take place. Here we are doing a little bit more holding the feet to the fire, if you will, that, hey, before you can even move forward with that new development you want to do, you've got to do, A, B, and C. That is a little unusual, I would say. I think it's more restrictive than I usually I'm used to with our PUDs, just because usually PUDs happen, they don't involve existing development that has a history like this. So yeah, I'd say this is a little unique for sure. It's more restrictive than they normally are.
Okay, and when you say holding feet to the fire, that's not us. You're talking about the governing body. That's the sports zone people, right?
We would be, the we here would just be the city and by extension staff, making sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing in the next 30 to 180 days.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions for our team? Deputy Mayor, is that your hand up?
Yes, but I'll let Councilman Lesser go first, please.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple quick questions. This would be the same type of circumstance, Bill, if I'm correct. If you remember, we had the issue with the movie theater up on the hill by the Red Robin in regards to the landscaping that you got involved in, and we went back because certain requirements were made by us for the development. The landscaping became no mulch, no dead plants, et cetera, et cetera. So it would be the same type of process, I would assume, as we did in that, where you sent a letter saying you have X amount of time to correct this. Am I accurate in that?
Yes, I think Councilman Lesser, I think that's pretty accurate. We go back, and in this case, it's pretty clear what your time frame is. So in that movie theater case, and it was landscaping involved. So it was we did allow them to get that stuff planted by the next season, if you will. So yes, it's similar.
Thank you. And just so I want to make sure that I'm clear, because we haven't done one of these in a while, but really what's before us is 3 choices. Is either to vote to approve it, vote to not approve it, or vote or send it back to the Planning Commission. And to not approve this, we're basically held statutorily that basically the 8 questions we have to be able to say that, for instance, the character of the neighborhood would be changed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're tasked with, correct, is these 8 questions. Go ahead.
And it's Mayor and Councilmember Lesser. Yes, you all act in a quasi-judicial fashion on this. So, I mean, that's kind of a different role that you play in this type of instance because the Planning Commission approves all of the rezoning applications. So, you know, when we're talking about the violations and traffic issues and everything, that's all come before the Planning Commission, and they've heard the testimony from, you know, the traffic engineers and, you know, the neighbors, and I believe they had some folks who had some expertise perhaps in this area. And that's where the staff report comes from, and all the minutes have that type of information. So in a quasi-judicial fashion, you have to really stick to these golden factors. And, you know, if you kind of go outside of those, there's a little bit of trouble that could come to bear via the case law. So that's why we just like to make sure that those are kind of in a little neat package and everybody remembers what those are.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Some of the questions and concerns brought up by my fellow council members are questions I had as well. They just kind of beat me to the punch. And I figured I'd just go ahead and wait my turn. I have had plenty of conversations with Mr. Fyander and discussions. And specifically, I went through a list of concerns and asked him to address them in this final proposal to show how those concerns were considered in the final proposal and what recommendations or what changes from the initial draft to what we see today have given due diligence on how to move forward, but address the primarily safety concerns and lack of enforcement concerns that have been expressed. I think he did a pretty good job for me anyway in enumerating those things in a way that bring him concisely to our consideration this evening. I do know, and I've asked the question of him, and he kind of alluded to it earlier, about reading between the lines. And I've talked with him and asked that if this is approved this evening, if that is the end of the attention we will give to the concerns of the residents affected by this. And he assures me it will not be, and I know it won't because I'll be knocking on his door. But there are a couple things that I still think could really make a difference, but keeping under the guidance of legal, that's where I'm trying to keep my decision tonight in the vote, is to make sure that I'm looking at Planning Commission recommendations and how they've stayed within those golden rule guidelines. And I think for me, this has, like I think Bill said, been a 2-year process at least, that I don't feel this is rushed because it's gone back to you and your staff a number of times. I do feel that this body has given due diligence and consideration for everything that's been brought as a concern in this PUD. So I just want to say that I appreciate the rest of the council posing the questions, because I think it's important that we talk about them now and not after the fact. So again, I just want to make those comments that the constituent concerns have not fallen on deaf ears. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Additional comments from the governing body for Mr. Fyander?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question and then, well, 2 questions, I guess. One is, where did the 180 days come from for the time to put the buffer in?
Councilwoman Hiller, I think that pretty much coincides with the end of the planting season, if you will, for landscaping. I think 6 months, this is a pretty improvement that they would need to be making, and so it's the 6-month time frame and the end of the planting season seem to coincide with each other.
So maybe better to do some of that planting in the fall rather than the spring. Is that what you're saying?
That would be ideal. Yeah. Actually, a fall planting is better.
Okay. The other question that I had, I guess as I look at this, my assessment is that it's clear that the planning staff and the planning commission worked really hard on the particulars and trying to address, at least it seems to me, trying to address the best that could be given. This is a tough situation to make good, but to make the best of the situation, it seems like they worked hard at it. And aside for that, Councilman Duncan, is that my understanding is that the 270-degree angle is actually just getting out of the driveway onto the frontage road, which is not heavily trafficked and should not be if there aren't trucks on it. Otherwise, it's just a bottleneck at the sports zone. That's my understanding of it. So that relieved my concern on the safety issue a bit. But what it seems like a management issue, really, which is beyond the planning thing of, I don't want us to have to keep running out there and enforcing. I don't feel like the residents should have to complain, and I sure don't want to have the city time and expense to file legal action against these owners. So what I'm wondering after this discussion is whether we could, along the lines of what I think Bill was saying, if we could do a provisional approval that would require that those deadlines be met on or before their deadlines, at which point the rezoning would become permanent. I'm not sure that's been done, but this would be a question for legal.
Mayor and Councilmember Hiller, we couldn't do that at this point, but what I would tell you is if they do not adhere to those timeframes, I mean, we obviously, as we talked about, I know that you said it would be nice not to have the, legal staff have to spend the time to follow up with these things, but that really is what we would be doing. We'd file violations in municipal court. If it's really serious or something, we could file some type of injunction, I'm sure. But I think at this point, a provisional is not something that's available. If you remanded it, you could do that, but the Planning Commission's already considered all the things that I've kind of heard, concern expressed about this evening, and they sent it forward with a 6-0 and 2 abstentions. So I think you could perhaps postpone it, but I wouldn't recommend that. I think that at this point, it's been through a 2-year process, and we probably ought to just make a decision and let the legal system flow through and make sure that those deadlines are adhered to.
Thank you.
Councilman Duncan?
I'll just say 2 final things. I guess the first is I'm a little confused because I asked about that. We got an answer. We then found out we may not know the answer. Do we now know the answer for sure that a CUD and a PUD can have to be treated differently, or are we still just sort of?
Councilmember Duncan, there are, I guess, timeframes that are set out in the PUD, which is the 180 days to get that type of thing done. And I think that we would be able to argue that that's something that's set, that they need to get that done, and that there would be some type of prohibition or some kind of violation that we could file through municipal court.
Well, my last comment will be I will probably vote no on this evening, and my preference, and I don't think that's going to happen this way, would be to send it back with, I guess, 2 questions. One, get some actual clarification from staff on that question, the provisionals, whether it's possible, because it feels like we're still in a little gray area. And the second is, I understand that maybe there's nothing we can do about the traffic issue, but comments from staff in our packet indicate that we just aren't sure, and we're not sure what that solution is, and I would like to send it back with a directive. Take one last look, and if you come back to us with like I said, I'm sure that's not going to happen this evening, and that's fine, but that will be why I probably vote no this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Duncan. No comments or questions from the governing body? If not, what is the pleasure of the governing body?
Motion approved.
We had a motion for approval. Do we have a second? Councilwoman Nager seconds. There's no other questions or comments. We will proceed by voting.
Mayor, a point of order. I believe we have to declare our ex parte communication.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, yes. At this point in time, we have a motion and a second, but we will take a moment to disclose if we have had ex parte communication. This is important because it is important that we are able to, sorry for the cacophony, to state that whether we have received information or not, and that we are able to still make an impartial decision on this matter. So if you have received any ex parte communication and you would like to disclose your ability to impartially make a decision, this is your time to do so.
You want us to go one at a time, Mayor?
Yes, sure.
So I think everyone did, we all received, I think, several emails from opponents. I also spoke last week with actually the engineer for the applicant, just had a question which he answered. Nevertheless, I can make a decision based on the relevant factors, impartial decision.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Deputy Mayor, please, since I can't see, be my eyes and call on people, and then I have Councilwoman Ortiz also with her hand up over here, so.
Madam Mayor, I too have received numerous communications and have discussed issues with parties involved, and I do believe adhering to those standards that we've been given, I believe I can still make a fair and impartial decision this evening on this matter.
Thank you.
I would say the same. Obviously, I've had a contact and got the same, I think, the same emails that everybody else did, so.
Mayor, I can make a fair and impartial decision. I've talked to proponents and opponents, and I've received email and a phone call, some phone calls. Thank you.
Go.
Councilman Builder?
Neil.
Yeah, it's only the emails in the last few days that I think all of us received, and that does not prevent me from making a fair and impartial decision. Thank you.
Same here. I've had no conversations, but I've gotten the same emails or mail that everyone else got.
Same.
Same goes for me.
I too have received the emails, reviewed all the correspondence. I have not had any conversations with either proponents or opponents of it, and I can make an impartial decision.
Okay, everybody has made their disclosures.
No,
Councilmember.
One more.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala, I received the same.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala, yes.
I received the same emails to the city council and no other communication, and I do feel I can make a fair and impartial decision.
Thank you very much.
City Attorney has her hand up.
Yes, the city attorney.
I was thinking, Mayor, if it would be okay prior to the vote, since there's a lingering question about how the application of conditional zoning, whether that applies the same, in this situation as it would to a conditional use permit. Would you mind maybe a short 5-minute, 10-minute little recess?
I think I would welcome that because at least it would give you the opportunity to do that checking. So if the council would be amicable to this, we would recess for 5 minutes to allow staff to provide us information regarding to a pertinent question in order for us to proceed with this vote. So it's 7:09. Let's call it 7:15 when we return.
Okay, we're checking on the cup or cut. Oh, it's all we're checking on.
We're ready. Mayor?
All right. So we reconvene the meeting. At this point in time, could the city attorney then provide some information to the folks at home?
Okay, so the question was whether or not we could treat a PUD basically the same as a CUP when it comes to conditions. And you can place the conditions in each of those documents, which we have. Bill Fyander talked a little bit about the 180 days to get the buffer up. But the difference, and we can pursue those. If they don't do those things, we can pursue them in municipal court and through whatever legal remedy we would have available to us. But we cannot, with a CUD, you can revoke it, but with a PUD, you can't. So we cannot engage in conditional zoning. The zoning would have to go through, and we would have to just pursue, whether or not they're on time and getting X, Y, or Z done through the legal system. So no conditional zoning.
Okay. Comments or questions after the news?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I'll just say thank you for that explanation. That somewhat answers my first concern. I will say, and I know there's some ideas to how to alleviate some of the traffic concerns. Yeah, I would just wish that had been dealt with better in planning before it got here. And so because of that hole, I still may vote against on this, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Okay. So I don't see any more hands, and I'm sure that somebody will yell if I am overlooking you. So we do have a motion and we have a second. And as you all know, there is no ability for us to have public comment. We do have 3 alternatives at this point in time. The motion was made for approval. So at this point in time, if there's no further comment, we would proceed with the voting.
Councilmember Duncan?
No.
Lesser? Yes. Mayor De La Isla?
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller?
Yes.
Valdivia Acala?
Yes.
Ortiz?
Yes.
Emerson?
Yes.
Padilla?
Yes.
Nager?
Yes.
Dobler?
Yes.
We have 9 yes, Mr. Duncan voting no. Motion carries.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir, Deputy Mayor.
thank you. I'd like to ask the city manager, after this discussion that we've had and with some discussion I've had with Mr. Fyander, I would like to ask the city manager to work with Mr. Fyander and city engineering and pursue a study that would give us the possibility to provide an additional north entrance to the property that would give direct access to Burlingame Road to the residents. I think that might help us also still continue our due diligence in addressing the safety concerns that have been expressed. So I would ask for that.
Thank you. Yes, it's something that we can look into, definitely.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We move on to the non-action items.
A is discussion on the 2022-2031 CIP and the 2022-24 CIB.
City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight we're going to have a discussion on more issues related to the CIP budget approval. So first of all, I want to thank Jessica, Steve, Bill, Cochran, Braxton, James, Josh, and Adam for all the work they've done over the last couple of weeks since we last met and discussed this. Staff has done a lot of work to try and dig further as it relates to the issues that were brought up in the CIP. First thing I want to start with is a discussion as it relates to the surplus funds from 2020. Yesterday, I sent you a new email that has a new breakdown as it relates to how we would utilize the funding from the surplus as it relates to additional surplus that we had from the general fund from 2020. The change that I made was we had a very high natural gas bill that related to the February cold spell. we had an additional 400,000 over what we typically have for natural gas expense. So I've cut what was originally 500,000 for the Housing Trust Fund down to 250,000 and using 250,000 to cover our natural gas bill. This was a very high expense, unexpected, and feel that this would be a good way to utilize our surplus funds to address this. As we look at funding as it goes forward related to Housing Trust Fund, we are going to be looking at the American Rescue Plan dollars that we have and the possibility that those potentially could be utilized, potentially to make up the 250,000 if so desired by the governing body. The other items remain the same. They are items that were either intended to be used by cash, or they were items that were to be bonded and paid for. And so at some point, I will ask the governing body to approve these recommendations so that we can make sure and set aside this money for these purposes. Are there any questions related to the surplus funding and the general fund?
Questions for City Manager? City Manager, there's none.
Okay. The other item that it relates to was asked to look into from Councilman Dobler at the last meeting was the items related to the debt service fund and the surplus that exists in there. The city has closed a number of projects in fiscal year 2019 and 20 that allowed $1.8 million in each of those years to be transferred back into the debt service fund that can be used to pay down debt. This amount, in addition to $2.1 million that has built up in the fund, can be used to fund other projects. In total, an additional $6 million of capital projects, $6 million of capital projects could be funded. To access these funds, the governing body will still need to approve debt issuance and ultimately retired. In other words, the short-term debt issuance that we've done in the past. So we would issue a short-term note to ourselves and then pay back with the funding that is in the debt service. That's the only way we can do that. We can't fund a project directly with cash from this fund. You have to issue debt, and then you pay that debt off. When you pay the project and then pay the debt off, that pulls the cash down within that surplus, within that debt service fund. So it's a accounting procedure that we're required to do because it is debt service money. So I'm going to be recommending that $2.1 million out of that $6 million be used to close out currently open and previously approved projects, and that the remaining $3.9 million be added to the FIRM program for the purpose of fire station repair work. We have identified that as being a major issue through the work that we have been doing in the facilities department with Hannah and Ulrich, and we believe that that would be a great way to be able to utilize and prepare and do that work. We have a substantial amount of work that needs to be done as it relates to plumbing, HVAC, vehicle exhaust systems, power systems within the buildings, fire alarms, lighting, exterior lighting, all totaling about $3.4 million, plus additional roof and window repair work that needs to be done in those buildings. So this is a good way for us to utilize cash funds in order to make the repairs to those buildings. As it relates to the open projects, it was mentioned at the last meeting, there were a number of projects that we needed to consider in that long list that was there. Since there had been a lot of work that had already been done, a number of projects that were on that list had already been closed out. They just aren't reported on that. Besides that work that had previously been done in the months of January and February, additional work was done by staff. And we have pleased to report that this month we've listed 50 projects that are nearly closed. And there are another 100 projects that have been closed since the fourth quarter report. So over 100 of those projects that were on that list have been removed, and there are another 50 that should be closed within the next month to 2 months. So we are really working hard to whittle that list down and give it to you in a form that shows the progress that we've made on various projects. In the future, we intend to present the quarterly report with the financial report and then a separate quarterly report on project closeout, so that our project closeout list more mirrors where we're actually at as it relates to these projects, giving you more real-time information related to where we're at in the report for closeout of projects. The quarterly report is typically 3 months behind where we are actually at on completing a project. So it's really not the best indicator in that same report. So we're moving forward on that. So I stopped there regarding what I'm proposing related to the surplus funds and the debt service fund, that we will use $2.1 million to close out currently open and previously approved projects, and the remaining $3.9 be added to the firm listing for completing fire station repair work.
Questions for City Manager? Yes, Councilman Emerson, to be followed by Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. City Manager, I didn't quite understand. Did you say 2.1 million out of would be used to close out currently open projects?
Right. There are a number of projects that were opened and no funding was specifically identified for them as it relates to those projects. And so we need to have an identified project funding source, and our intent is to utilize 2.1 million of that money in the surplus in order to close out those projects.
Okay, thank you. If I can ask one more, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Also on the, I totally support adding money to the firm program. I guess my only question is, if that's great to have an identified use, I guess my only issue is, would all those be ready to go at one time, or are we going to handcuff Ms. Ulrich?
No, she has been developing a plan to be able to do that through the work that Short Design Group has been doing related to identifying all of the needs within the fire stations. She has a very good plan to be able to move forward with doing that. We're going to be looking at situations where if we have plumbing needs or electrical needs in multiple stations, that we look to group those bids so that we can maybe take advantage of similar type work from a certain type of contractor. And so she has a very good plan, and I think it'll be measured out. I mean, not all of these things are going to happen at once, but they will be planned out in a very judicious way to be able to move forward with getting these repairs done as quickly as possible.
And will this then reduce our bonded projects? I mean, were these already programmed to be done? So this will be a reduction in future spending?
No, well, it won't reduce future spending related to firm. We have identified many millions of other work that needs to be done in buildings. What it will do is move this to the fire stations to the front of the line, more or less, related to some of those planned projects.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, I really appreciate the explanation tonight. I think this is a worthwhile expenditure of those funds. Just the fact that you said we need to fix fire alarms in fire stations points out kind of the odd position the city finds itself, and this will go a long ways towards. We're not talking about enhancements to fire stations. We're talking about just taking care of what we've got. I assume this will address or begin to address the roofs and the ceilings.
Yes.
And some of those issues that we've heard about over the last few months. So just a big thanks to you, Jessica, Steve, Anna. Good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, can you tell me, with the repairs, the basic repairs that are going to be going on, will we be getting a report to the governing body, or will that be something that will be going to one of the committees on what has been addressed at each station? I know that was one of the things on the Fire Commission. There was just so much uncertainty about what had been repaired where, even with, I think there was some uncertainty with Chief Duke when he shared information with us.
We'll provide those reports to the whole governing body.
Okay.
Everyone wants to know what's going on as it relates to those, so we'll just go ahead and provide to the entire governing body.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. And also, thank you. Also, with the 2.1 million to close out certain projects that are open, how is that going to be determined what project or projects that will go to?
We have a list of the existing projects that were open that need additional funding in order to be able to close. And so we have a list. I don't have it with me, but we have a list of specific things that need to be done. I know one of them off the top of my head is a fire truck that needs additional monies to be able to close out that project.
So would it be kind of like you have open projects and maybe the first 3 or 4, will you go in that way, determining like what's the first project or the second project or the third project?
And actually, this 2.1 million identifies all the projects that we know that are outstanding that need a funding source to clear them up.
Okay, to clear them off.
Yes, to clear them off the books and close them out.
Okay, so it's all of it
Yes.
to close it out. Okay, all right, thank you.
And I will say, you bring up something that made me think, we also are doing a lot of work as it relates to some open projects that have additional funding to them, but nothing tied directly to use as a completion of a project. I'll give an example. We have a SORT program that is still open that has a little over $600,000 tied to it, but no work projects directly tied to that. And so we will be able to look at doing additional work in that SORT grant in that neighborhood, but we need to identify what work we will do. So, for example, if there are more alleys, sidewalks, what does the neighborhood want to do to close out that money available? Another example that we have is we're finishing up City Hall, and there's still a amount of money that was there. Once we close out, then the money that was appropriated will come back into to the fund in order to be able to pay off debt. So we're in the process of identified a number of projects that still have funding tied to them, but no work. And so eventually that money will come back to the city or will be utilized to complete the work that it was intended to.
Mayor?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I am here struggling with an allergy really bad and my eye is shutting, so I'm sorry if I can't see you.
That's okay. And if Councilwoman Ortiz was ahead of me, I just looked up and I had a question to City Manager. So if you could, I'm having a little trouble keeping up with all these, so forgive me if I'm misunderstood. On the projects that you talked about closing out, are those ones, and money being returned, are those ones where the money was already bonded, but we didn't spend the limit?
Correct.
Okay, so that money the finance department would just have to get it all figured out to put it back.
Correct. And we will utilize what it was intended for. And for example, in the case of the City Hall, we won't use all of it. Once we get the completed projects done or that we have planned for City Hall and all change orders, et cetera, and whatever money is left over from the issuance will then be returned to the fund to use to pay off debt.
But the 2.1 that you talked about before, is that where projects went over what was budgeted?
It was a case of where a project was started and no funding was requested for it. So in the case, I'll use the case of a fire truck. A fire truck was ordered, but notification wasn't sent, so the money wasn't allocated in the bond issue to pay for the fire truck. So we're cleaning up that type of situation.
So it might kind of balance out, sounds like. I have a few more, if I may. When we've talked before, when we looked at the fourth quarter report and talked with you about it, there was extra money, net revenue over expenses to the general fund. Is it okay with you if we make proposals to?
Well, what I would say is that I've already, with the 2.63, basically 2.6 million of general fund surplus, is what I'm recommending we utilize for the list of about 9 projects there. That's my recommendation related to those. If you, as a group, want to supplement those with something else instead, that would be the option that you would be able to do. I'm not proposing to go any further into our reserves. This is strictly the surplus that was available to us after the completion of the 2020 year. So that 2.6 million is the surplus that's available to utilize on other projects that we have out on our CIP list.
Right.
And so I'm recommending we use it in this form.
I thought the COVID money, the leftover COVID money was different than the.
I didn't reference that at all. That is
Okay.
in a separate account, and
Okay.
there's money that is still available for us in the future for doing other types of projects if we desire, and other types of spending at some point. And I'm not recommending we do anything with that money at this time because of its specific nature. It is a opportunity for us to be able to do something different with that money if we desire. But focused mainly on what we had for our surplus for this year. That would be a whole different discussion as to how we want to utilize that CARES Act money that's setting aside.
Okay, I thought that's what your recommendation had been for all along.
No.
So I may get with you on some specifics, but thank you for the clarification.
Okay, Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you. City Manager, on that SORT money, are you gonna use that's left over? Are you gonna put that back into that neighborhood, or what was approved, or
Yes,
how would that work?
Yes, we will, staff is going to be looking at what we see as issues related to that neighborhood. I'll just use the example of if there was, when the SORT was initially done, if they talked about, that neighborhood talked about doing alleys, we will identify alleys that we feel are in their neighborhood that should be repaired, changed, and fixed up. If it was sidewalks, we'll identify sidewalks, but we'll also work with each NIA that has that SORT money still available to get their input on that as well. So it's going to be done in conjunction with them is my final word.
Okay, where are we at on 5th Street from California to Market? That street is terrible. Where's Bill at? And I know we put that in the SORT that just got approved for North Topeka. Right, not North Topeka, East Topeka North. And, but it's terrible. And now that we have traffic going through there with the detours, it's even worse. You can barely get one car down the street. The potholes are terrible. So we have basically a half a street.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics on that particular project. I don't know if Bill or
Well, City Manager, you're the one that got us to put that in that SORT program to get it fixed as soon as possible. I mean, you talked about it over at Salvation Army.
Oh, I'm aware of that, Councilwoman. I'm just not sure specifically when that project was going to be started. Bill, can you provide any further info?
Councilwoman, that is in engineering right now. I believe they're doing their design work on that. So whether that starts by the end of the year or in construction season next year at the latest. But I'd have to get some more information from engineering on the schedule.
Well, I tell you what, I don't think it can wait till the end of the year. It's that bad. It's that bad. And you've got the buses going through there. You've got all this traffic that's going through there. I'll take the infrastructure team through there. Maybe we can get something done. But I don't think we can wait that long. I'll tell you what, Bill, I'll pick you up in my Jeep and I'll take you for a ride.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. We'll get Mr. Jackson and Mr. Schreiner on there and see what they can do.
Yes.
Okay, I will send an email just to remind everybody, but it's bad, and I go through there all the time. And I'm telling you, it's a half a street because the street is broken apart for so long, and we didn't maintain that. So I'm just putting that out there.
We will get back to you with a better answer.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions for City Manager? Okay, City Manager.
All right. As it relates to the rest of the items we have presented with the CIP, the project changes that we made back in March, I believe it was, or excuse me, April, where we made adjustments to the CIP as it relates to doing additional street work, mill and overlays, and other items. And so those, we haven't had any specific comments on changes that you're interested in the CIP. So I think, if you have suggestions related to that, we would like to be able to provide you input as to any changes or modifications, amendments that you're looking at in the area of the CIP. And so I guess with that, stand for any general questions related to the CIP. Staff is available as well if there are additional questions on specific issues.
Questions, Manager?
Just one.
Yes,
just for clarity, it's been difficult to kind of come back with alternative suggestions or even questions to some extent with the examination that's been underway of the open projects. And so we got one report from Chief on utilities. We just got a kind of an overview from you on GO. Is there an expectation on your part that obviously some of those are cash funded in the first place, one way or another? Others, we can't tell from looking at those reports whether they've got temp notes on them, whether they're bonded, where they are. Are you expecting that when it's done, there will be other money available generated out of that review?
I don't believe there will be right now.
Cochrane's nodding yes, and you're nodding no.
There's specific money that's been targeted, but it would go back into the debt service fund.
Sure, but that's...
we'll close out a number of those projects, but I can't tell you an exact amount as it relates to where those will end up. So there is going to be additional fund when those projects that already have money available. I think our initial $8 million. Yeah. So right now, roughly, we're looking at about $8 million that still needs to work through the system. In other words, it was approved for the projects, and the projects need to continue. But as mentioned, some of those projects we're going to actually see to fruition, and so some of that money that's listed there out of that $8 million is still intended to be used for its original purpose. But as Chief of Staff mentioned, we intend to have that report for you at the next meeting.
Okay. That'll be helpful, just to clarify. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Additional comments for City Manager or staff?
Yeah, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, I guess I had a question. As I understood it at the last time we spoke about the Housing Trust Fund, that there was some private fundraising that was going to happen in that.
Right.
I'll just tell you, I don't know, I have no idea how everyone else stands, but I would be much more inclined to give taxpayer money to that fund if I saw the other side meeting us, I guess, halfway. I don't want to be the only, I don't want to hand over taxpayer money if
I can tell you that,
willing to.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, I was just saying, I don't want to hand over taxpayer money if people aren't willing to basically put a little skin in the game themselves.
Well, two things I would say. Our intention from the discussions that I've had with Director Finder as we move forward, and he chairs that committee, they have been working through the plans that they intend to utilize in order to approach for private donation. It really is a question of which comes first. Do we put our money in as seed money to show that we're serious about making something happen with the trust fund, or do we want to see the private donations occur and then we contribute too? I think one of the things we need to remember is that whatever funding comes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we control. So if we were to put $250,000 in there, that $250,000 is going nowhere unless the council approves a project in order to be done. So it's not as if it would be able to be utilized by someone else without our authority.
And City Manager, if I could add, I think that one of the biggest concerns that I've had with the discussion of the Housing Trust Fund is that for some reason, and I understand why, the development of a Housing Trust Fund has been ascribed as a movement and a need that a specific organization has. And I understand that not always the interactions have been pleasant, but the reality is that aside from it being one of the things is a specific organization may be proposing, the reality is that the problem in our community is real. We don't have a mechanism that will allow us to have an ever-growing fund to address the housing needs that we have in our community. It's been years. I'll never forget when Mayor Wolgass got elected mayor. First thing that he did was a summit on Blythe. And the reality is that the problem that was identified was that we had a lot of houses in our community that needed to be worked on. We paid good money for a housing study that indicated that we have a gap in housing. At the same time that we also, when we talk with our developers, understand that they're not building in the city because it's just not profitable. So when we think about the Housing Trust Fund existing, my call and my prayer to all of you is that we look at it not from the perspective of who is talking about it loudest, but that we talk about it from the perspective of the needs of our community and understanding that this is a great vehicle for us to have a source of funds that will go to ameliorate some of the biggest challenges that we have in our community. So just keep that in mind. It's taxpayer dollars that will go to make more tax money. It's actually an investment because every dollar that we invest in making housing gives us tax dollars back. So just a few comments for consideration because those are dollars that would be from the city for us to use in our community, not to go to anybody else. But I appreciate your remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. But, yeah, and I guess my issue is always whenever I hear like a trust fund, is I see money going to the sidelines. You know, we just heard Councilmember Ortiz talk about how she has a street in her district that money could probably repave that entire street. I mean, I haven't seen the extent of it, but if it just needs a mill and overlay, that could probably do that entire street. So that could solve something right now in the next 6 months for that whole neighborhood over there. So that's my concern, is that we tie up money, we set money over here, and then we go borrow money to do our other things. So that's, I don't disagree at all, Mayor. I just, again, my understanding was when we first set that up, a group was out fundraising, and I'm all for that. I'm all for us to come in and partner, but I hate us to be the only one dancing. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager.
You bet.
If I can pitch just a little bit on that as well, I think everybody knows that I'm totally supportive of affordable housing and neighborhoods. It's what I've done for my lifetime as well as what I represent today. But I am very troubled in this seat in that in simple terms, we got to fix our streets. Nobody else is going to fix the streets. Nobody else is going to fix the utilities to keep utility rates down and keep water and sewer going. Nobody else is going to fix our buildings. There are partners available for affordable housing, and we need to engage them in what we're doing. Maybe there's a middle road, but my top priority with this budget, especially this year, and looking forward is to fix our street, is to make sure that I have prioritized our top priorities as a city. I've been on this council for 12 years. We stretched out the first 10-year half-cent sales tax. We still have work to go. I think we're getting close to the tipping point of being halfway done, but I just think we have to prioritize streets, curb and gutter, those fundamentals that only the city will do. And further, looking ahead, and we've talked about the debt service and so on before, but as I look at it, to me, part and parcel with prioritizing those streets and the infrastructure, other infrastructure in the buildings is looking ahead, looking at what belongs in debt service and what doesn't. And we've got a lot of repairs in there right now. We're basically, it's like using credit cards for your groceries. We're borrowing money on day-to-day expenses and preventive work. We have things that we want to do. We know we've got Pope Quincy pending. We know that there's discussion of building new fire stations. We're expecting that we might choose to do a new law enforcement center, perhaps do some relocation of our departments from the riverfront area. Those are the kinds of things that you do borrow money for you. Those are big projects, one-time ones that you amortize over time. If we want to be able to do those kinds of things that really borrowing is for, we've got to get that other stuff out of there. And so when I've been looking at it, as I've said in some of our earlier discussions, and I'll do my best to synthesize it as we bring this down, that the more we can use this opportunity with some reprogrammed funds or some extra funds to knock out that stuff that doesn't belong in there, get it done, not just put it down the road, but get it done. We'll be in such better shape to do maybe some extra things in the future, as well as do some of those big developments that we know are pending or are going to be opportunities. So that will be my lens, and I hope it's shared. I think it is shared with most of the folks on this council to prioritize those things. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. If respectfully, if I could make a quick remark before I call Councilwoman Nager, that rose her hand. The only thing that I'll say is, memory serves me right, the number one form of revenue for the city of Topeka happens to be mill levy. And if we choose that we're going to work on projects that are going to be an expenditure for our city without us making an investment in what matters most in our community, which is the people and the lives that we are called to take care of every single day, which also, by the way, would make it investment so that we have better property values. Which will allow us the opportunity and the privilege to be able to serve those roads that we so need to fix. Then I think that we have to reframe the thought with regards to an investment versus an expenditure. So, Councilwoman Nager.
Hey, Madam Mayor, you really stole my thunder. Because that's what I wanted to say. I know that we have a financial team that is versed on how to use debt wisely for city expenditures. We do need to talk about making these wise investments and improving our quality of life, so we do have more revenue coming in to make these projects. These projects aren't going to just be fixed overnight, and they're not going to be fixed with doing some of the same things that we've done before. So I'm all for creative problem solving. And so just to be cautious about how I want to make sure that we're spending our money wisely. Not just in the most straightforward way, but in the smartest way, using the expertise that our city finance department can lend us. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a point of privilege. I have been having this eye shut. I'm having a really bad anaphylactic reaction. That's the reason that I'm not in the office right now. I don't know if you noticed that my voice is coming and going. I'm going to have to bow out of this discussion and respectfully request that the deputy mayor finish us off. So thank you very much, and I am so sorry that I'm having to cut it short for me.
I have a comment. Am I recognized? All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. If we're talking about this $250,000 to give or take, when we have a CIP that has 99.8% of it going towards infrastructure and buildings and other projects, I, for one, will have no heartburn at all if we take $250,000 of those tens of millions and put it towards something that, for better or worse, you agreed to put into our budget priorities when I asked us to a couple months ago. I will also say, and I said this when we adopt any proposal, if we're not going to listen to the people who do these studies, we need to stop paying people to do these studies. And to that point, what I'll say is, I believe it's both in that study, and I think they made a point when they were presenting, and I know it was part of the conversation we then had when we did our task force afterwards, was historically what they told us was, you will get private investment, but you have to put something in there first. Because as the city manager alluded to, it sort of is a game of chicken, right? Everyone wants to see who's going to blink first, and most of the private dollars wait to see if the city is serious, and the way they know that is there's some money put in that pot. So I'll just go back to that a little bit, where that was one of their recommendations. If you're going to create it and do it, you've got to put something in there. And so that's why I at least like this aspect of it, because I know there's no such thing as extra money. I know, right? My wife tells me that all the time, trust me. But since we do have an opportunity here to sort of carve out that very small piece, that's why I'm sort of supportive of that effort, because it seems like the opportunity to do it. So thank you very much.
Any other comments?
Any further comments? Look up there as well.
I have.
Okay.
I have one to end once everyone's done.
City Manager?
All right, the last comments that I have is that as we look at the schedule for approval of the CIP, we have another discussion scheduled for next week to be able to go through what we're putting together as relates to these projects that we're finding that there is excess funds for and so forth. I've alluded to that. And then anything else that you would want to look at. But the intent is that we need to move forward with closing this out. June 1st, I need approval. I really do. We need to move on to the operating budget. And so we really would like to close out this on June 1st. Obviously, that's up to you. You can always defer it. But as staff, I'd request that we really work hard towards approving this on June 1st. I know that we've had a lot of new information, and it's been a very good exercise for us. And there have been benefits regarding this delay. But eventually, we need to end this and make a decision, yes or no, bring forward your amendments, vote those up or down, whatever. That's my request of you come June 1st.
Thank you, City Manager. And we also have Mr. Joe Ledbetter signed up to speak. That's okay.
Just a second, I've got to get some notes up here. If you mind. Apologize. Had them. Well, let me have to go. Anyway, all right, I'm ready. Here we go. Joseph Ledbetter, and I've spoken on this item several times in the past, and I think that we need to vet these discussions very pointedly. I've still got a lot of questions about the revenue bond indebtedness that we've taken on. But before I go into that, I want to make sure I cover a couple other points. $20 million is certainly correct for the Pope Quincy Viaduct. Just want to say that. I've said that before. I do oppose adding $400,000 a year for several years for more heavy equipment. I think, as I watch the council, and I watch other bodies too, that have public dollars, I don't think we really squeeze these dollars enough down here to satisfy my point of view. I think yes, we want to spend a lot on infrastructure, and I get that. Problem is the money doesn't seem to get down to where it needs to go a lot of times. We spend a lot of money on middle management. We spend a lot of money on personnel. But when I spend $6.5 million on street repairs, am I really getting that? Could we not privatize some of these things with edits and some of these other great contractors and get a lot more of this work done quicker and not have the burden of so much staff? Because we are a shrinking city, whether you like it or not, the city has lost population, and we have to deal with that. And that means you cut expenditures, you cut personnel to match that. You have to match that footprint. I'm looking at this 200-page document, and there's a couple points I want to make before I run out of time. On page 4, I've got utilities, CIP projects for $138 million over the next 4 years, which is 42% of CIP. Is that really necessary? Are we really scrutinizing these numbers? Do we really give the oversight over utilities that we should be? I mean, it's 1/3 of our budget. And I hardly ever hear any discussion about projects or any contracts that are being led over there. And so it's kind of like a black box. I don't know what they're spending money on. I know some of the things I've seen appalled me. I won't go into it tonight, but they're in parks. But I go to page 5, revenue bonds, CIP, the same years, 2022 to 2026, is 245,957,000, and is 49% of the funding sources. And I remember asking last time we had this discussion, are we putting pots of money that we're borrowing into funds to build up reserves instead of actually replacing the pipes in these distribution lines? Because I never see the fleshed out version of what we're going to spend the money on in the CIPs with utilities. I see maybe a $6 million for water lines, but I don't know that it goes into the distribution areas where most of the breaks happen. That's in the neighborhoods. And in fact, I don't see a lot of those projects done. I also would like to see a revenue bond table like the GO bond debt table that's on page 8. It's very simple to read, very simple to understand. And it seems like some of the numbers I just quoted you are in conflict. So are we actually borrowing a lot of money and not spending it on the projects, but we're building up reserves? Because that is exactly what that study said when we went and increased our rates. I'm going to ask for, okay, I'm on.
Mr. Ledbetter, how much more time would you like?
I'm going to ask for 2 minutes if you would pleasure me on that.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. Motion and a second. Additional 2 minutes.
Council members Lester? No. Mayor Daley? Council members Hiller?
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila?
Yes.
Ortiz?
Yes.
Emerson?
Yes.
Padilla?
Yes.
Nager?
Yes.
Dobler?
Yes.
And Duncan.
Yes.
So we have 8 yes, Mr. Lesser voting no, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Lesser. And so, I'm going to send you a lot of emails now. Because I can't say it now. I got to put it in emails. Okay, so, you know, it was talked about the trust fund. You know, I like that idea that the $250,000, it's so minuscule compared to these huge amounts of money that I can't seem to get straight answers on. Did we put it into reserves? Or are we actually going to spend it? Why are we borrowing money to put it in reserves when the reserves are already sufficient at 15%? That is a best practice nationwide. So, you know, maybe somebody down here doesn't like that, but that's what is taught at the best MPA schools, KU, and that's also what's taught to many city managers in other schools. 15% is adequate. And I think the last time I checked, water, and I could be wrong on this, was 40% already. And yet we've got all these broken lines. And we seem to not be controlling overtime. I've been hearing that. So in spite of putting on a second shift. So some of these things that build up our CIP debt and revenue bond debt potentially are operations problems and management problems that aren't being solved. And, you know, I could talk about code enforcement and all that, but that's not part of CIP. But what I would really like to see before we bring this back is a true breakdown of these revenue bonds, how much they've grown. I'm seeing that the GO bonds are at about 150 and that the revenue bonds are now over 200 million. So it seems like we've done kind of a flip side on that over the years. And I'd like to see that history. And I'd like to still have that straight answer. How much of this money, I guess maybe we need a comptroller, but how much this money is in reserve that we borrowed and we haven't spent and aren't going to spend? Thank you for the extra 2 minutes, and have a good evening.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just in response to Mr. Ledbetter, I'm not certain if it's been posted yet, but we had some of those same concerns about some of the what I call the bucket projects, you know, and utilities did give us a breakdown of some of those, and if that's not posted, I guess I'd ask.
I don't believe it's posted, Councilman.
Okay, could we post
to you?
Yeah, can we? I mean, we
can share it. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to number 6, which is public comment. The only one signed up is Mr. Joe Ledbetter. You just get 2 minutes because you had an extra 2 in the end.
Can I do this in 2 minutes? I didn't realize it was that quick a turnaround. Okay. So I am going to ask that those items that were emailed to you be emailed to anybody who requests them, and I'm requesting them. I want to talk about a couple other issues besides code enforcement, which is really dear to me. I'm about worn out talking about it and it not being solved. But the streets are what people are telling me that, and then some codes is what they want finally fixed. They're just fed up with it. We pay tax after tax, property tax, sales tax, all kinds of taxes to fix our streets, and it just doesn't seem to be satisfactory. They're just not done quick enough. It seems like we're too heavy. We're not light enough to actually be nimble and actually solve quick problems. And I think that's just part of the problem of the hierarchy of this bureaucracy down here. I think we really need to look at a lot of reorganization down here and start thinning out the middle management and start privatizing more and more of the projects, which means everything from forestry, giving that to private contractors when we need trees removed or repaired. We've got a lot more trees than the city of Topeka does in Parks and Rec. I'm on that advisory, and we handle that budget of 2,200 acres with about $200,000 as compared to $830,000. And that doesn't even include all the money you're buying new equipment for these people and all those expenses. That's just the operational budgets. I think we could really look finally at we've got some new people in public works. I think we need to really focus on privatizing more and more of these operations on how to repair our streets and finally get these problems solved. Maybe we could talk to the county. Maybe they'd contract with us. I don't know. But I'll tell you, it's just to the point of being fed up that you drive down so many streets, and after all these years of extra sales taxes, it's just not done. And so we've been, we've given people 3.5 years to do this. It's not done. The street that that Sylvia's talking about, I actually saw that about two months ago, and it's just a horrible street. In fact, that whole area around that school is just broken up. I don't think you're going to do a mill and overlay on it. Some of those streets are just that bad. And when we don't do the crack and seal like we should, and we begin with the basic maintenance of these asphalt streets, and we let them go for years and years, that's what happens. And they just wear out and they break up. It's a lot of times the problems are not about money. It's about leadership. It's about being cognizant of trying new things, about being a problem solver that can nimbly react, nimbly move on projects without taking a 9-person committee to figure it out. Get out in the field and solve it. That's what any construction manager does. That's what people do in the private sector all the time. They solve these problems, or they are out of business, period. They don't get to have somebody tax and keep their job if they can't solve the problems. And I'm not just talking about 1 or 2 people. I'm talking about a whole institutionalized system, it seems like, with streets, that we just don't have an attitude of a can-do attitude that we're going to solve these problems. It's gone on way too long. So I obviously give the new person some leeway, but these are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We'll move on to announcements. Madam Clerk.
May 18th agenda consists of, we have 2 board appointments. We have, on the consent agenda, we have 2 resolutions for special events. We have 4 noise exemption resolutions. Action items include an ordinance for zoning change at 115 Southwest 12th Street at 1222 Southwest Jackson Street. We also have another ordinance for a planned unit development located at the intersection of Southeast 45th Street and California Avenue, and then the corresponding final plat. Non-action items include a discussion on Title V business licenses and regulations to repeal certain licenses, and then the CIP and CIB continued discussion.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. First item I have is TSD is pleased to announce the resumption of CPR First Aid AED training. These classes will be offered quarterly with the remaining dates for 2021. These will be non-certifying courses scheduled for 2 hours. They will cover hands-only CPR, basic first aid, and use of an AED. Classes will be limited to 12 registrations. Currently looking at June 28th, September 28th, and December 7th, and all those are from 3 to 5. So the 2022 schedule will be posted in September for additional information. One thing I would like to cover is that it is mentioned that about the streets and are currently where our PCI is at 65, which when we started this whole process 10 plus years ago, we were at 55. So our current rating is making progress. I know that there have been a number of changes that have been instituted by Public Works that relate to multiple issues that have been brought to my attention where we're getting potholes done within 24 hours. So I know that there are work to be done, but we are making changes and we will continue to strive to make sure that we make those improvements as necessary.
Thank you, City Manager. Mr. Lesser?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I actually have a couple things tonight. The first off is I wanted to again tell Mr. Jackson that how much of a breath of fresh air he has been to work with, and the topics that we've had to deal with together. I've been really impressed in working with you. One thing I would like to ask you, if you would take a look at least in the next couple months, is, and I'm asking you to do this because you're new and you don't have a dog in the fight of whether it's worked or whether it didn't work, but we've been doing the microsurfacing, the slurry that goes over there, and I'd like to get your evaluation of how that's working since what are we, City Manager, about 2 years in roughly? 3 years. So I'd like to see, I think we've got enough time that we can see what the results of that are. And you didn't bring it in, so if it's not worked, you can say it's okay. You know, it didn't work. So if that's all right, I'd like to have you do that. The other thing is I would like to ask if we can get it for a discussion item in the future, City Manager. The representative from Bird Scooters here. I'm getting blown up around Gage Park of walkers and so forth, and then emails of, I know Karen has as well, from downtown of using them to use the wheels as graffiti and stuff. And I don't want to be Mr. Party Pooper, but I had some concerns when we initially contracted this, and I'm glad we're not in the scooter business, but I'd like to see how he's working with. I know there's some software that allows them to turn them off like they do golf carts on golf courses and stuff, but I think unless my colleagues disagree, I wouldn't mind having an update of how that's perceived, and then so we can all ask some questions.
I'm sure they'd be happy to come
at the same time. And lastly, then, I think he's watching because he's quarantined for a week, but I drove my son Dylan to his seasonal wildfire job in Yuma, Arizona for 22 hours. Yes, I cried like a baby when I left. And I know that he's in his hotel room probably watching, and so just wanted to thank him for his service and tell him that I'm proud of him, and not to forget the journal, because I told him to do that for himself, and I paid him to do it too. So anyway, that's all I got.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I noted the scooters too. I know that they're working hard to stay on it, and we've heard back tonight even about the graffiti or the marks downtown, and so at least they're trying. I'm seeing them parked a little better now, so we shall see, and I certainly support your request for comments. Wanted to comment briefly about the opening of the weir. It was fun. It was just a blast. We had 12 kayaks come in for it. The park is just gorgeous. It was just a surprise to me that the landscaping and the sculpting of the park itself, it has never felt like a park. It's been a parcel of land that had two, what do you call them? The drives to bring the boats in and out, and ramps, 2 ramps, and that was about it. And needed to be cleaned up periodically and mowed more often. And it's just so nice. It feels like a cross between Gage Park and the south end of Lake Shawnee, where people are always hanging around fishing. Just felt really good. And so kudos to city manager and the staff from water, the utilities on our end. The county is fully engaged in terms of working with the city about the future of the development of that space and the uses of it and so on. And there are many other partners. There were about 75 people there. All sorts of people were there. The parking lot's now regraded. It's pleasant and safe. It's just, we worked so much on the water part of redeveloping the river, and somehow the park itself and the fishing and all the other things that people look for in a park to just come and sit and watch the water go by, watch the people go by and fish and things like that were happening also at the same time. And it's going to be quite a treasure that I'm not sure anybody anticipated. And I wanted to also do hats off to our Topeka legislative delegation and the Whitney and the city manager and the key staff that have been involved regarding docking, because the legislature voted to save docking and set aside the money for it. There was disagreement about the labs, and right now anyway, I think there'll be a chance to bid on it one more time, but it appears that the legislature is not going to put the labs in docking, but we'll go ahead and save docking. And the other part of the resolution there was that the new labs would be built in Topeka within 8 miles of downtown. And there were a lot of positive comments about the fact that we had invested so much in downtown and revitalizing our city that the state really should be determined to help support that with both of those projects. And that's a great credit to everything everybody's been doing. So good work and congrats to all of us. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Valdivia Acala.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just wanted to remind folks in Oakland that this coming Sunday at 4 p.m. At Lundgren Gymnasium, we have the startup of our Neighborhood Watch program, and Judy at Neighborhood or with Safe Streets is going to be coming out and giving us some training. And as I stated earlier, we can go block by block or every 2 blocks or however folks want to do it to get that ownership back that we need to come together as a community and deal with any number of issues that are continuously reported, and to understand that we all have skin in this game, right? So I hope last meeting before this Neighborhood Watch, we had about 25 people or so show up, and so my hope is that that will continue to grow. Also, folks around Topeka, keep an eye and ear out for the Fiesta food sales. Fiesta is not going to be happening this year, but they are having a number of food sales. I don't know, I don't have a schedule here, but I'm saying just look out and support when you can. Also had a wonderful, meeting, good start meeting with the new historic North Topeka West NIA officers. There is a lot of good energy and a long list of things that they are wanting to do. And so I hope to be working with them closely to where we can consider things like neighborhood watch, CERT, et cetera. And just a final blatant shout out of love to my 13-year-old grandson, Adrian Michael Lehman. His first game at Canberra Trailblazers was yesterday, and he pitched 5 out of 7 innings. So his pitching lessons are going good, and I love you, mijo. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ortiz. Hey. Thank you. Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just to kind of follow up on Councilman Lesser, Mr. Jackson, they did microservicing out in my district, I think maybe 2 years ago. And the only issue with it is cracks seem to come right back through, especially the big traverse cracks across the streets. And I don't know if there's any way there's some sort of bond break you can put in there or something to keep those just from reflecting back through so quickly. But I would say there's actually this season bids, you probably know this, but it bids next Wednesday, the 19th. So it might be something, if you're going to look at, you might need to look at between now and then or postpone that bid, I guess. And lastly, I just wish a happy birthday to the city manager. Thanks.
Thank you.
I guess I was the only one who got you anything.
Councilmember Nayer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to remind everyone that the month of May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And that recognition kind of hits a little bit differently this year with the rise in anti-Asian sentiment that we've seen in the past year or so, specifically to do with COVID. If you are interested in finding out more about how to support your Asian and Pacific Islander family and friends, you can go to stopaapihate.org. It's also a little bit, it's appropriate to go ahead and focus on this particular part of our community this month because of the terrible spike in COVID in India right now. If you are interested in finding out more on how to help India, there's many different charities that are working very, very hard to make sure that hospitals are getting the appropriate PPE and oxygen. Some of those organizations include Direct Relief, and I have my notes right here. Direct Relief at directrelief.org. The Center for Disease Dynamic Economics and Policy at cddep.org, and that's Oxygen for India, specifically going after resources to get hospital-grade oxygen to people who need it. And the Association for India's Development. It's a grassroots organization that promotes sustainable development. And right now they are working on getting PPE to hospitals, and that's aidindia.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dobler. Where is he?
Nothing, Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Duncan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just 3 quick things. The first is just a thank you to staff. Of course, as this time of year, as we get more water and moisture, there's some areas that didn't used to have flooding problems in my district that suddenly water wants to go places it didn't used to go. So over the next few weeks, staff and I have some field trips planned throughout the district to try to do some preventative planning before those things get worse and become a huge expensive problem. So thank you for working on that, to the staff with me on that, and we'll see what we can get done. Second thing is, I always appreciate it when people have faith that we actually can get things accomplished, but there are limits. It's always a good reminder to people. See, click, fix. as we all know, great app. I'm amazed. I keep telling people about it still. What is that? I've never used it. So I'm always proud when I get someone to download it, and we're pretty responsive. But somebody in my district keeps putting on C-Click Fix, please come take care of the bunnies that are coming into my backyard. And I've had to tell her, you know, we have limits as to what our abilities are in our city, and bunny prevention is probably not high on the list. But I appreciate that she is confident we can help her with that problem, and I think I'll go talk to her and see if there's anything we can do to help her with her bunny problem. The last thing is, you know, we've had a good week. As I've read through news stuff the last couple of weeks, I realized that we've had a mini sports mecca the last 8 days or so. I just want to go down a quick list. Washburn Golf made the NCAA championships for the first time in a decade. The Shawnee Heights won the United Kansas Conference Boys Golf Championship. My alma mater, Topeka West Tennis, swept the 5A regionals. We had 2 Topekans, Dustin Hobbs and Megan Springer, who won the Kansas Crappie Trail event. Washburn's Merritt Mead was named the MIAA Softball Freshman of the Year, and even Gary Woodland made a run at trying to win that tournament this weekend before he finished 5th. So just congratulations to all those folks and everyone that I missed, and kind of a good sports week for the city of Topeka. Oh yeah, 2 NFL players drafted. See, I left them off the list. So just wanted to point out a little good news there for Topeka tonight. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to add a couple things along the lines of good things happening around here. I want to thank Mr. Jackson. I don't think I had the opportunity before, for your help and assistance in moving forward a very important memorial to the veterans in Oakland, moving that project forward and helping get that through and getting taken care of. I appreciate that effort, sir. Also, I want to mention a good thing happening over at the Salvation Army. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala is associated with this, and especially with her husband, Representative John Alcala. We had a meeting just this last week and updating the success of that program, which is an after-school boxing program for after-school for youth. And they have it twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, and in each session they have no less than 35 students that are participating very actively. It's not become a babysitting thing because the parents are staying. They're coming and being there with the kids to see them progress and as they move forward. I think it's extremely effective. It's something really that the Salvation Army has been behind 100%. And then we received good news on that same meeting that they've been approved to move forward with adding soccer to their activities there as well through that area that's just to the south. We got an approval and moving forward with that. So again, that'll be another thing. It's timely with the summer months coming up and kids getting outside. So I think that's another good thing happening in Topeka. And I want to thank Parks and Rec, Shawnee County Parks and Rec in particular, Tim Laurent. He's been working very closely with the group of the Bring Back the Boulevard group, and really working hard to bring Gwendolyn Brooks Park into a really usable space for the residents to the west there in Likens Foster. He's very quick to respond to requests and needs, and I visited with him just this last week at the ribbon cutting at the Union Station, which is gorgeous. It's a great place for Topeka. But I want to thank him for that, because I think we really need to continue that collaboration between the city and the county. A lot of people just make assumptions about who's responsible for what, and especially looking at Gwendolyn Brooks, going through there and figuring out who owns what. There's a road through there that isn't a road that I was told, and the only thing that really the city has any responsibility for is a drainage ditch, and everything else is the county's. But they really take on a very active effort in cleaning that up. So another list of things that are happening good in Shawnee County and Topeka. That's all I have. Is there any other business for the body? I believe that we have an executive session.
Correct.
And if the clerk would read the parameters.
Yep, I can read them, no problem. The motion is to recess into executive session for a period of time not to exceed 20 minutes to discuss upcoming employer-employee negotiations, as justified by KSA 75-4319B3. In order to aid the discussion, the following individuals should be present: members of the governing body, City Manager Brent Trout, Chief of Staff Bill Cochran, Administrative and Financial Services Director Jessica Lamondola, Human Resources Director Jackie Russell, Interim Police Chief Brian Wheelis, Senior Assistant City Attorney Catherine Walter, Budget and Performance Manager Stephen Wade, and myself. No action is anticipated to be taken when the open meeting resumes in the governing body chambers.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to recess into executive session?
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Yes? Motion
Oh,
is,
I was just going to make a motion, but I saw Councilman Lesser raise his hand.
yeah, he's fast.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you read the roll for the vote?
Councilmembers Hillard,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Mager,
Yes.
Vogler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
and Lesser.
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
Okay, we'll recess for, what, about 5 minutes before we go into the session?
I guess.
Okay, we're coming out of the first segment of our executive session. We find that we have a need to extend for an additional 15 minutes to continue our discussions. Do we need a second motion to go back in for another additional 15 minutes?
Yes, so moved. Seconded.
Motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please, for the, what do we need?
Just raise.
Or just raise our hand? Okay. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. All those opposed, same sign. We're into a second executive session for an additional 15 minutes.
Hey, I'm gonna have to go out, so I will see you.
I was going to ask.
I remember when I first, my first term anyway, the firefighters reached out to everybody and invited them for coffee during the negotiations, you know,
We're coming out of executive session.
And there is a need to have another executive session, but we also will have to have a motion to extend beyond 10 o'clock, which is our time that we typically end our council meetings, but discussion will take us beyond that. So I need a motion that we could extend beyond 10 o'clock.
So moved, Deputy Mayor.
You have a motion and a second? Motion and a second to go beyond 10 o'clock. Can we raise our hands? Okay. Now we need a motion to move into another executive session to continue deliberations. Not to exceed 30 minutes.
I'll read the call.
Okay.
All right, the motion is to recess into executive session for a period of time not to exceed 30 minutes to discuss upcoming employer-employee negotiations as justified by KSA 75-4319B3. In order to aid the discussion, the following individuals should be present: members of the governing body, City Manager Brent Trout, Chief of Staff Bill Cochran, Administrative and Financial Services Director Jessica Lamondola, Human Resources Director Jackie Russell, Fire Chief Craig Duke, Senior Assistant City Attorney Catherine Walter, Budget and Performance Manager Stephen Wade, and myself. No action is anticipated to be taken when the open meeting resumes in the governing body chambers.
Okay. What she said.
So moved, Deputy Mayor.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, we'll adjourn into executive session for 30 minutes. Okay.
Live.
Okay. After having our executive session, we are adjourned with no further business for the body.
Bang. That was decisive.
Hey,
That's awesome.
there's a cockroach. Okay.
Live.
Okay. After having our executive session, we are adjourned with no further business for the body.
Bang. That was decisive.
Hey,
That's awesome.
there's a cockroach.